very clear that a lot of the arguments about pornography have actually returned. Because on the one hand, in the last few years, actually it's begun to be something to protest about again. I went to a protest just 2 years ago outside the opening night of the new Playboy Club that was opening in London 30 years after the first one had shut down. There's been protests outside Tesco's where people have gone and covered some of the magazines with brown bags. It's also been really reignited in the last few months, I would say, returning the whole debate about the impact of pornography on those who watch it. After the recent... Sorry? Okay. The recent trials that have gone on of Stuart Hazel, who was convicted for killing 12-year-old Tia Sharp, and Mark Bridger for killing 5-year-old April Jones, because both were found to have violent pornography on their computers. And actually, one of them was found to have watched it just hours before he abducted and killed one of the young girls. And this has really led to a whole number of calls on Google and other internet search engines to police the internet, for search engines to change their default option to exclude porn, Tories like Maria Miller meeting the internet companies, and debates going on in Houses of Parliament. And I don't know if people saw as well, there's been the announcement of a new academic journal, actually, that's going to be devoted to porn studies. This was announced in the Observer a few weeks ago. But actually, it's caused a lot of controversy, because it wasn't just moral outrage that there would be a journal about pornography from the right wing, but actually a lot of women campaigners, actually like Gail Dines, who's wrote this book, who's from Stop Porn, actually saying those involved in it are pro-porn. And so there's a whole number of arguments. And I say these arguments have resurfaced because the debates about pornography were actually really central during the 1970s and the 1980s. They came out of the women's liberation movement and divided not only, if you like, the left and the right, but also actually people that saw themselves as feminists. And many of the debates here are not really new. Of course, they take place in a different context at the moment, but a lot of the debates echo some of those ones in the 70s and 80s about censorship in the state versus freedom and choice, actually often characterised as being pro or anti-sex. If you're against pornography, does that mean you end up lining up with the moralistic right wing? Does pornography cause harm to women? Does it cause women's oppression? Or, actually, can it do something the opposite? Can it offer women's liberation and empowerment? What are the impacts of it all? So these are some of the themes that I'd like to try and explore in this meeting. I'm sure people have come with their own questions and issues they want to raise, and hopefully get a chance in the discussion to do so.
It's okay,
so the first thing to say is that it's not really a surprise that it's back on the agenda, because the one thing that everyone would agree with is really that the nature of pornography and some of the terms of debate have been transformed by both the internet and, on a wider level, if you like, the mainstreaming of pornography in society as part of increased sexualisation of society and raunch culture. Let's take the question of the internet. Over the past 20 years, the internet has completely transformed how pornography is viewed, and in turn, actually, the sort of images that are easily accessible. I mean, the survey I found is a few years old, it was from 2009, but in that point, it said that there are 420 million internet porn pages. There are 68 million search engine requests for porn daily. And actually, it can be viewed very easily, a few clicks away, for anyone minimally computer literate, or actually even on your mobile phone. It's now quite well known that the average age that pornography is first accessed is 11 years old. And in fact, a lot of the surveys have found that 90% of 8 to 16-year-olds have viewed porn online. I think it's important just to say something here about what we're talking about, because if you're over 30, like me, and don't look at porn, then actually you're probably 20 years out of date in terms of knowing what is out there and what is very easily accessible. As I say, I include myself in this category when I took on doing this meeting. I wondered if perhaps I might needed to watch some pornography for research, but actually the very graphic descriptions that you can find in books like this provide a lot of information, actually put me off. When I described to a friend the stuff I'd read in this book, he said, oh, you know, but surely that's the extreme end of porn, isn't it? Actually, it's not. It's the mainstream and can be accessed very, very quickly. And the main type of pornography that you find now on the internet is something known as gonzo, which is basically wall-to-wall sex acts. There's no attempt at a plot line. It's just sex scenes, really. Obviously, this is a lot less expensive to make and gets to, you know, the point of it all, I suppose. But just to check out that the authors of the book were not exaggerating, I decided that I probably should do some research. So I did Google pornography. I have to say I was immediately bombarded with what I would class as, we would also say as quite extreme images. And it's also true that a lot of the mainstream pornography actually is quite verbally and physically aggressive. That's the norm in it, rather than the exception. Now, I'm not going to describe the things in this meeting. If people want to look at pornography, they can do, and we can discuss that, or they can read the book. But I just wanted to say that I wanted to say and mention what's out there in the mainstream, because it's about we do know what we're talking about. These images are easily accessible. They're not lurking in a dark recess of the internet where you have to have specialist knowledge to find them, or perhaps even pay for them. Actually, they're available for free a lot of the time. They're offered as little teasers and samplers to get you hooked into the main websites. So they're not outliers, but they are mainstream on the internet and in the mass-produced porn films. And the point really I'm making here, there's a massive change going on in how pornography can be accessed, and the images, it's very different perhaps from my day when I was thinking about it, where you maybe a few magazines that teenagers would sneak and get hold of. It's very, very different in that way. It can be viewed in private at any point on your mobile phone. But the questions really, I think, that are raised about pornography, and all the questions that are raised about its impacts on everything in society, I don't think you can really understand without framing it in the context of the whole of that society. I actually don't think you can abstract porn out of the context of capitalism. In fact, I actually think an understanding of capitalist society and what drives it gives us quite a lot of insights into how pornography is developed and how we've arrived at the situation we're in today, really. And help us arrive at an understanding where the debate about it is not just about are you pro or anti-sex. Actually, it's not about the debate about is it just a problem with individual men or even all men, and it's not that pornography causes women's oppression. Instead, we have to locate it in that society, and it's driven by the logic of capitalism. Fundamentally, there's three aspects I want to look at that society: the big business and competition that drive it forward, the distortion of human relationships under capitalism, and an understanding that women's oppression is rooted in that class society. Now, let's first of all just be clear here. Socialists, when we discuss this, do not line up with the right-wingers and those who want more censorship. We want more openness about sex in our society. In fact, actually, this is one of the demands of the 1960s women's liberation movement, that sex should be about pleasure, not just procreation. It should be enjoyable for women as well. Women were sexual beings with needs and desires. And for many women, I think, involved in those movements at the time, it was for the right to explore more and different sexual relationships. The problem is that now we haven't actually ended up with more openness in the real sense. Instead, that desire for sexual liberation and more openness with the freedom to explore sex has been repackaged up and sold back to us in a particular narrow way. And pornography and how pornography is developed is very much part of that. And this is because capitalism is a system driven by competition and profit. It's a system that seeks to try and make money from every area of life. And so it turns everything into a commodity, something that can be bought and sold. Everything has a price, so you can extract profit. And that includes our emotions and our sexuality. And so pornography takes sex and the desire for sex, something that is a real human personal thing, unique to each individual, and turns it into a generic commodity that can be bought and sold. And by doing it, pornography has made billions. It is big business, extremely big business. And let's be clear here, pornographers are capitalists as much as any other capitalist. Their interest is not in making our sex lives better. Their interest is in making money. The market shares, niche markets, how are you going to distribute it more effectively? That is what drives them. And so every capitalist is driven by competition and profit. They are too. And the size of the porn industry is massive. And it's quite hard actually to get the reliable figures, but the global industry, back in 2006, these are the figures I could find, was estimated to be worth $96 billion. In the US market alone, worth $13 billion. But I think we have to be clear, pornography doesn't just exist as a business separate from the rest of capitalism or in isolation. It's actually linked to, and connected to many of the businesses that we think of being mainstream, and it helps them make profits too. So, you think about those that produce porn and those that distribute it, but what about the bankers, those that produce the software that enable it to be viewed, the hotel chains that have it on pay-per-view, the mobile phone and internet companies? I mean, for example, the mobile phone market for pornography is estimated to be $3.5 billion in 2010. Cable companies like Time Warner in the US make millions from adult, pay-per-view sales. All the hotel chains like Holiday Inn, Marriott, Hilton, all the rest their annual revenues are more than $500 million from showing it. And you've got the search engines, the credit card companies. It's also really important to say that when we say the internet has helped fuel pornography, actually, pornography has also been a key factor in driving technological advances. A lot of the advances that enable pornography to be viewed in private in any time with smaller mobile phones were driven by that industry. It helped create the technologies, high-performance sites, file sharing, video on demand. It blazes a trail, and then other industries follow. And now, they're talking now about a hidden internet, away from the main one, where real child pornography could actually flourish more easily. And so all this really means is that the pornography industry does not exist as an outlier to capitalism. It has absolute links to mainstream finance, media and communications. Actually, that means it has a lot of powerful allies, actually. And increasingly, its ownership is concentrated into bigger and bigger firms, and very well capitalised firms. They're brand names like Vivid and Wicked. They're two very big studios that produce pornography. So the question is then, where does this modern pornography industry come from? And I would say it's been driven forward, as I say, by competition, leading to more and more extreme images. But where did that come from? And a lot of the commentators seem to agree that we could trace pornography in its current form really to the 1950s and the launch of Playboy by Hugh Hefner in 1953. Now, of course, explicit images existed before this. But actually, before Playboy, pornographic magazines were not circulated through mainstream channels of distribution, so access actually was quite limited. And Hugh Hefner, who founded Playboy, marketed it in a particular way to help erode the cultural, economic and legal barriers so that he could enable that mass production and distribution. And I think it's quite interesting this takes place in the 1950s, because this is at a time of, if you like, mass consumerism as we know it today begins to really take off as well. And Playboy marketed itself in a particular way, not as a porn mag, but as a lifestyle magazine for upwardly aspiring men. Because at that point, the porn market, if you like, was dominated by cheap, under-the-counter pin-up mags that no one would have really displayed any, on their coffee table. Actually, Hugh Hefner was about saying, let's have an upmarket lifestyle magazine celebrating this cultural life, if you like. Of course, the centrepiece was the pin-up. And without it, even that's what made it sell really. But it was a very successful formula. And by the late 1960s, Playboy was selling about 4.5 million copies. But of course, this is capitalism, and other people see the success of this formula and think they want to make some money and decide to copy it. So in the 1970s, it gets its first major competitor, Penthouse. Penthouse decided to take on Playboy by copying the formula, but go a bit further. Let's make the pictures more explicit. Then you get another magazine, Hustler, comes out in 1974, even more hardcore than the others. And this isn't an accident that it becomes more explicit, because really it's a result of the battle between Playboy and Penthouse had actually been a growing acceptance in the mainstream market of this more explicit imagery going on, and opens the way for more mass distribution of more explicit materials. And so really, you kind of think the modern pornography industry wouldn't be anywhere near how it is today without them. On the one hand, you have Playboy, very important because even today there are the high-end feature studios creating this idea that pornography can be classy and tasteful, and the other side, Hustler, which is much more explicit, creating the gonzo-type porn that is really much more explicit that you get on the internet today. All of them making pornography increasingly visible in mainstream popular culture, pushing the boundaries and making it socially acceptable. Now, of course, the internet then changes things for all the three magazines. To stay profitable, they have to expand and go onto the website. But actually, what this means is that as the internet comes into being, competition between each company becomes even sharper. You imagine these three magazines are competing. They've got, 12 issues each per year. Actually, every year there are 15,000 new pornographic releases at the moment, never mind all the pirated and free material that's out there on the internet. That's a massive amount. I mean, actually, people talk about a sort of glut of products in this highly competitive market, which actually is making it harder for them to make money out of it at the moment. And that's why you can see when a lot of the pornography on the internet becomes more extreme. The market has become saturated, consumers have seen the same things, they're a bit bored, and whatever, so pornographers are constantly searching for ways to differentiate their product. And like I say, the magazines competed to how far they could push the boundaries. It's even more the case today at a much more frenzied pace, and I think it goes some way to explain why we're seeing what we do today. But what we're saying here really is that in order to make money, the pornography industry has taken sex and turned it into a product to be sold to make a profit. And Gail Dines, who I would actually urge people to read this book, I think it's quite a useful book to read, might be some differences with us, but she likens it to an industrial product. And I think that's right, because actually what you're talking about is the mass production of sexual images. And the thing is here, by definition, if you're going to package something up, mass produce it and market it, it can't be complex. It actually becomes very narrow. You can't really explore the intricacies of what makes sex a unique and powerful experience. And so rather than an expansion of our horizons of sex, I would argue it actually limits them because it presents a very narrow vision of sexuality based actually on complete stereotypes of what sex is and what men and women are meant to seen as meant to want from it. And you think about these stereotypes, you think about actually how women are portrayed in pornography, absolutely conforming to a stereotype of what is constructed in society as being sexy or hot. You know, i.e. most of the pornography performers would be thin, toned, large-breasted, often surgically enhanced, hairless, more often than not blonde, and actually no sexual desire of their own, but instead their desire is constructed as being as what the man wants. And we have to be clear here, mainstream pornography absolutely does objectify women. Whether it's the Page 3 or Playboy Centrefold or the images in FHM or other lads mags, they objectify women by reducing women down to one single image to be what they look like, or more specifically actually what their body looks like. And that's absolutely the case with the pornography on the internet, reduces women down to a sexual object and a series of body parts to be used in that way. But also, as I say, it's very narrow because pornography is extremely formulaic. I mean, there's so many minutes given to each particular sexual act. Sometimes they might want to change the order and give, longer or shorter to certain ones, but always ends really with what they term in the industry, which I think says a lot. They call it the money shot, which exactly is what it is. And basically, the man ejaculating on the woman, but they see that as the end of the scene because that's where, the key thing you're making the money about, really. And so what we're saying here is the complexities of sex are stripped away to create this industrial product, and all the myriad of ways that humans can express themselves sexually do not feature. The excitement, desire, raw, real human emotion can't be there because what you're seeing is artificially manufactured. It's a particular construction of what sex is, acted by people who are paid to do so. And I think people might have come across over the years the book called Female Chauvinist Pigs by Ariel Levy. Again, I think it's worth having a read of. But I think she puts it quite well, really, because she says, you can see almost any sexual act imaginable if you spend enough time on the internet, but no matter how much you watch, you will end up with a very limited view of your own sexuality because you won't know how those things actually feel. And she says, I don't really see why we should regard pornography as a way to enjoy sexuality in all its explicitness, any more than we would consider looking at a chart of the food groups as to be a feast. And precisely because it takes sex and packages it up and to sell back to us, it means that the sex acts we see, whether they're in magazines, in videos, or on the internet, are completely abstracted from any real human relations. Sex is an isolated act. Now, when I talk about human relations, I want to be clear here, I do not mean that sex has to be in some sort of deep, meaningful relationship based on love. But what I mean is, sex is an act between humans. It can take place for many reasons, desire, attraction, love, whatever, but they are real relations of whatever kind between real actual people, whether they've just met that night or been married 50 years. But in pornography, sex is human need that's part of us in the unique ways that takes place between humans, becomes separated off and alienated from the idea of it being based on real human relations. It's an alienated, objectified form of sex. And so really it kind of turns it on its head. Sex, which is meant to be this whole thing about your relations, is turned on its head and taken and abstracted completely about any real human relations. And as I say, reduces it down to this narrow, formulaic version of image or moving images, strips of any real human relations, merely a commodity. And let's be clear here, we know, as I've said, it's driving its money. It's not actually even designed to satisfy you. Actually, it's the very opposite. There's a lot is meant to leave you wanting more. A lot of research is done by the companies to find how much more money can they squeeze out of the customer, essentially before he has an orgasm, and so they try and put more and more pay portals within a site so that you pay and pay and pay to squeeze more and more money out of you, really. So it's not about catering for our real desires, it's actually about how to make money from those. Now, of course, the arguments that people that defend pornography, the arguments there have always been dressed up in the language of freedom and choice. People choose to watch it, women choose to perform in it, after all they get paid, so it's all okay then. There's an added twist at the moment, I would say, to all these arguments that legitimise pornography, in that now we're told we, particularly as women, we should embrace it as being empowering and liberating. It's not based on degrading sexist stereotypes of women and this narrow vision of sexuality. Instead, it's fun, empowering and liberating and can help us explore our sexuality. This is what magazines as Cosmopolitan tell us quite a lot to do. The argument sometimes goes even further, that those that defend pornography argue that the performers are empowered, they're in control, if we get with it we can all be liberated too. And the thing is, this buying into pornography takes place on every level, because we know about the sort of pressures that exist for women about how they look. It becomes extended even further, doesn't it, really? Because it's no longer just right, to have the right clothes, or the right makeup, or the right face. It's actually, you've got to have the right breasts, you've got to have the right vagina, it's about everything else. Sex is no longer about your desire, it's something that has to be shopped for, and can take place when your body looks in that certain way, really. So it's not about what your desire is, it's what you think will be desirable, you think will look hot. And much of these things take reference from pornography, because I think what we're seeing is a massive seepage of pornography culture into the mainstream. And that is not accidental, because on the one hand, pornographers put a lot of work into product placement. The things that normalise pornography. I mean, one of the most nauseating things people must agree with me, is seeing the Playboy logo on, little girls' pencil cases or socks or all those sorts of things. But, it takes place in a variety of ways. The backdrop to films and TV, often there might be some lap dancing going on in the background, or with a pornography film showing in the background. I mean, I don't know if people saw the film Sideways. The main character in one of the scenes is just seen nonchalantly reading Hustler, Barely Legal, the magazine that prides itself on showing women that are meant to look under 18. When you look at the US, I haven't had the privilege of seeing this terrible show, but I just read about it. This film called The Girls Next Door, which is meant to be a reality TV show set in Hugh Hefner of Playboy fame's Playboy house with his so-called girlfriends. Things like Sex and the City often have stories about pornography in it in that way. Or you think about the books and films, the book How to Make Love Like a Porn Star, which in itself is an extreme form of alienation. We're going to be instructed to make love like someone who has been paid to have sex in this way. And you see this whole crossover, which has happened very much in America. I think it's coming more here, of where women who are stars, if you like, in pornography, become celebrities, and much is made of the glamorous career. I don't know if people have heard of Jenna Jameson or Sasha Grey, who are two of these stars, and they're very much portrayed as women. They're in control, they've made loads of money, are doing something that they love to do. Actually, if you read the backstory of Jenna Jameson, who I think she's actually the woman that's made the most money out of starring in porn, when you read the backstory, it's a little bit more complex. She was raped and abused as a teenager, thrown out of her home by her father, moved in with her boyfriend who said, I know, we need to get some money, why don't you go stripping? She was so desperate to get the money, she pulled the braces off her teeth with pliers. So this is the backstory. I think it shows something a bit different, but they're portrayed as being very glamorous and they're almost role models, as it can seem like a good career move in that way, really. And so pornography is displayed glamorous, something you want to emulate, from the t-shirts that says porn star on it, the books and films and the magazines. So it brings me to the next question, really, about, but people might want to explore this further, does pornography cause women's oppression? Because this was a big question from the 1970s, where radical feminists, people might have heard, people like Andrea Dworkin or Susan Brown Miller, did argue that it was pornography that caused violence against women and women's oppression. Given what I've just described, that much of mainstream pornography is quite extreme and violent, you can see why you might conclude that it causes male violence and is responsible for it. I think we've got to be clear, is it the case that pornography alone causes women's oppression? If pornography was stripped out of this society and the rest of it remained as it is, would sexism disappear? Would violence against women disappear? I don't think so, because women's oppression existed long before pornography became accessible in the way that it is today. And socialists argue that rather than image alone causing men to act in a certain way, it's the other way round. Women's oppression has a material basis. It's rooted in the material reality of how society is organised. It's rooted in class society, and that society itself plays a role in shaping our sexuality. In particular, women's oppression under capitalism is rooted in the institution of the family. Whether you live in that traditional family form or not, it is used ideologically and held up as this ideal to aspire to and emulate in one form or another. And of course, things adapt and change. But the family is crucial as a way of capitalists to be able to bring up the next generation of workers, make sure they can go to work, make sure that that happens and they don't have to bear the cost of it. That's thrown on to women. So of course it changes. Women have changed their roles, have expectations, work, and the majority of women work. But at the same time, this is still what they're expected to do at the same time. It used to be women maybe just stayed at home, looked after the kids. Now very much it's the case that you work and still have to do the kids and look great and have great sets of all these images that you're being looked at. But all of these things in wider society reinforce the role of women, that women have certain roles in society, even if they do other things. And we're socialised into those roles very much. Babies are not born with any expectations of our society or our role in it. There's a myriad of ways that this happens. From the moment a baby is born, from the gendered toys I'm sure we all feel horrified about, the clothes, the how babies are played with, and all those things. What pornography does is it mirrors back that sexism and women's oppression that exists in society, but actually does it in a more extreme way and reinforces it even further. It reinforces that gender division that women are sexual objects and men can be buyers of a product. That division traps women into what we're saying, a denial of your own sexual needs. It's not really about your own desire anymore, it's what you think you're told is desirable, and the belief that women's bodies are to be ogled at and bought. And actually, when you look at pornography, actually I don't recommend people do that, but it's not just about sexual stereotypes, but also extremely racial stereotypes actually as well. I mean, as a whole, Black and Asian performers are paid far less in the pornography industry, but Asian women are always portrayed as being submissive, tiny, petite, adept at serving men. Black women are seen actually as wild, untamed, unkempt, aggressive, that they need to be feminised. There's a whole genre of pornography called as ghetto porn, which is set in the ghetto, and you find that women have to make them presentable. So really quite reflecting the really nasty, deep, racist and sexist ideas in our society in that way. So what are the effects of this really? Because like I'm saying, this is not the cause of women's oppression, but actually what I'm saying is it reinforces a view of women as sex objects, it perpetuates these extreme ideas, and this is something that came up, didn't it, with the horrific cases that I talked about at the beginning of when young girls have been murdered by men really. And I think we have to be clear, there is the question of causation really here. Was it the pornography that made them do it, or really were they already predisposed to commit horrific acts or abuse children and then looked at the pornography in that way? As I say, if you were actually a violent aggressor in that way, it might not be a surprise that you look at pornography in that sense. There's also other questions that I think people will ask a lot at the moment about pornography and its impact and its harm, particularly on the impact of young people's sexual development. I mean, a lot of people describe it actually as a massive social experiment going on, involving people who don't really know they're part of it really, in terms of the internet access. And by this, I mean really, if we're accepting the figures that those looking at accessing pornography are younger and younger, this is taking place before they actually start exploring their own sexual identity. They're curious about sex, but actually they're not actually involved in having sex. What effect does it have on what they think sex is? Because real sex is obviously completely different to porn sex. And so again, you can see the expectations on younger and younger people about what sex is going to be, how women look, how men are meant to perform. That can have an impact and continue to perpetuate these stereotypes that we're talking about. For socialists, our starting point, as I said at the beginning, has got to be, we want more openness about sex. We want real openness though, and honesty. Because the irony is, we live in this highly sexualised society. Sex is all around us, bombarded with these images, and there's no real information about sex given. You know, we can look at all these images I'm talking about. If any of us was to walk around naked, actually, we'd be arrested immediately. It's completely, crazy in that way. And actually, one of the main complaints a lot of young people have is they don't get enough sex education, or of the type of sex education that would help them think about their sexuality, explore these things, negotiate relationships, and actually understand how you can negotiate the terrain of the internet. Rather than providing more information, this government has cut sex education. Actually, it's turned it into something to be moralised about, taking its lessons from the US, where actually a lot of sex education is all about abstention, which I don't think gives anybody anything to help. You know, youth services that can help people are being cut as well. And in that context, I actually don't think it's a surprise at all that many young people turn to pornography to find out about sex. They're curious, it's easily available, and the real information is not there for them. But what do we do then? Because as socialists, we oppose pornography, not simply because it objectifies women, which it does do, not simply because often it's degrading to women, which it often is, not simply because actually it can cause harm, I think, at certain points to the women involved in the production of it, at certain points, but because it takes something that should be based on some form of human relation and distorts it completely and commodifies something intimate and unique to make money out of it. It takes our sexuality, it sells it back to us in this distorted and alienated form. But what do we do then if we're against it? Because we don't line up with the right wing calling for more censorship. We don't even think this will help solve the problem. I mean, first of all, when the right wing start going about it, most of these people have a narrow and moralistic view of what constitutes sex, therefore less openness. And in that context, who makes those decisions about it? We definitely don't want to increase the powers of the state, especially at the time in the recent weeks, the revelations of spying on people, anything that increases the legitimacy of increasing surveillance, we are against. And we also know how those powers of the state can be used. But let's be clear as well, all the talk that's gone on about internet security is actually quite dishonest. Because if the internet really wanted to do this, they could block access to pornography just like that. They can shut down the internet sometimes in certain countries. Of course they don't want to do that and restrict access. They want to make it harder to make money out of it. They want to make it easier, for people to do it. So our starting point has got to be that we understand, not just young people, all people are probably curious about sex. As I say, wanting the openness and honesty about it, but not based on the stereotypes we're presented with of what is so-called hot and sexy, not based on a plastic, formalised, scripted depiction of sex by those paid to do it, but real sex in all its ways that everyone can be free to explore. That means you have to have information, we have to fight for proper sex education in schools. Actually, we're talking about some of the things around the fight about academies. It's part of that, actually. It becomes harder to have these things in those schools if they're faith-based or whatever way. We want proper youth facilities and services. We actually want people to be able to, actually train young people to be able to negotiate relationships, their sexuality, the internet, in that way. And so we have to fight for all those things now, and against some of the terrible images that access into the mainstream. But also, the thing is, if we're saying here that pornography is part of a society driven by competition and profit, where every emotion and human feeling is commodified and turned into profit, then actually, ultimately, we have to fight for a very different sort of society, free of the stereotypes of what men and women may want from sex, free of that oppression, a society where actually we can fight for real sexual liberation, real freedom for all, in a completely different way, that in many ways probably is completely unimaginable from what we're given today and the images that we're sold.
My name is Shanice, I'm a member of the SWP Houston branch. I think Amy's right to say that we can't abstract porn from the society that we live in, and what that means is that porn reflects sexism. But it's very important what Amy said, it actually reinforces sexism as well, specifically the notion that our bodies are commodities, or the notion that forcing someone into a particular sex act is acceptable and something that we're able to do. I saw a tweet on Laurie Penny's Twitter feed the other day, and it was basically a tweet in defence of rape porn. Her idea was if the rape porn's consensual, then it's okay. How you can tell if rape porn's consensual when it's meant to look like rape, I have no idea. If she were to tell us about that, I'd be quite interested to know. But I don't know if people remember the 1972 film Deep Throat, which was basically, what's her name? Linda Borman, and in the film it appeared as if she was consenting, but later on, we found out that actually there was a quote where she said, virtually every time someone watches that film, they're watching me being raped. And she was manipulated and deceived and lied to into making that video. So I think what porn also draws out is not just questions of sexism, but also questions of consent, because actually the experience of being pressurized and manipulated and lied into porn is actually a very common experience for women in porn, but also for gay men in porn. So rape does, rape is quite prevalent in porn, and that's also a question around consent that we need to draw out, because even though if you look back to the history of, and the philosophy and the theoretical questions behind consent, it's quite a difficult topic, but at the same time we know full on that if you're significantly manipulated and deceived into having sex, then that is fundamentally rape. And porn that is sold as rape porn as well raises the question. It reflects but also reinforces a sexist idea that consent doesn't matter and that abuse is okay. So, and again, Amy's right in situating rape and rape porn and porn within capitalist society, which actually links the overthrow of these kind of ideas and of the bad things about porn in the fight against capitalism. But also what I think is important is that in the here and now we are, and everyone in this room does this and would agree with this, that we are raising the questions of women's oppression in the here and now, because it's only by having a united working class, united across gender lines, that we can overthrow capitalism in the first place. And that means politically we have to be engaging with the questions of women's oppression concretely, by being there when the slut walks happen, or by being at Lucy Meadows' vigil, etc., etc.
Hi, I'm Xiao Tam from Taiwan. I actually have a question. How is the socialist and Marxist view of desire? Sex, especially sexual desire, because I work in trade union. I first work with container drivers union, and then I work in sex workers union. And what is difficult for me is we think it's important to identify the the gender issue, but underneath that, the most important thing actually is class. And I think a lot of workers, they are good customers. And what we want is an even and equal deal or business. But I totally agree what you just said. But for me, I think desire and how can you make your desire how can you not put your desire on other people's benefit? I guess that's my. Is it clear? It's related to my work, but I think we need to talk more, because it's also in Taiwan the sex work has a special historical background. But I guess I'll just put my questions forward, just what's the view of sexual desire or desire? Thanks.
I just really wanted to elaborate a bit really on the point that, the very important point I think Amy was making about how porn restricts. Because I'm a teacher in a secondary school and I'm a head of year 12, and one of the things I am very aware of is the extent to which students share images of themselves having sex. I won't go into the backstory of it, but I was discussing this with a very intelligent young woman in year 13 who's off to do a degree in English at university in Leeds. And for reasons I won't go into, a student having sex with her boyfriend had been, students in the sixth form had shared it. And when I spoke to this student about it, I said, why do you think she, was videoing herself having sex? The student absolutely knocked me out by saying to me, Miss, everyone photographs themselves having sex. Every girl wants to be a porn star. Don't you video yourself having sex? I mean, seriously. You're not going to see that on YouTube, I'll tell you. She absolutely shocked me by this. Because students share it, young people share it, and they're making judgments about each other, about the way that they behave, particularly the way that the girls behave. But also, I think the point Amy raised about the way that we live in such a highly sexualised, society, it isn't just that there isn't sex education, that is bad enough. There's no relationship education in schools at all. Teachers even if you weren't responsible for that years ago, you would have had time in your classroom to discuss with students their personal relationships. That is now completely off the agenda, because the only job you have as a teacher is to get them the target grades that you've been set by your management, because you are on some restricted appraisal policy and performance-related pay. But also, just in terms of the rest of the adult world, I am struck by how very many of the young women in my school who are teachers go on speed dating, do internet dating, etc., because capitalism is forcing people to work longer and longer hours. Parents have no understanding of the world in which their children are sharing their first sexual experiences. Staff work longer and longer. We have to say capitalism is extracting surplus value out of us at an enormous rate, and to be quite frank, very few of us have the leisure, the opportunity, the time to develop really meaningful sexual relationships in our society. And so all of us are experiencing this restriction, and the reliance on the pornography industry is booming because we're too busy working to have meaningful sex.
Thanks, I think this has been a really brilliant talk. I just wanted to pull out one other dynamic around LGBT oppression. That as a lesbian, you often feel that you're being identified in a way that is framed through pornography as about pleasure for men. And it's often something that me and my partner and my friends will talk about, that you can just be walking down the street holding hands or just sitting in a bar, and it's taken as an invitation and just seen in that way. And I think porn really plays into that oppression. So just to pull that out. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Carl from Burnley. I feel like as a young adolescent male I may not come off particularly well from this. But I'd like to make 3 points. One on the point of those men who murdered the two girls. I feel like on that point it's not exactly... Maybe the poll was a factor, but I think it's like when a shooting happens in America and suddenly there's a lot of Fox News activists going, video games are distorting our children. And I feel that it's more of a social thing, especially in America where guns are literally in Walmart have their own aisle. Also, my second point, as I get to, I feel like you said a lot about women being objectified in porn. I feel like there's also an ideal male image in porn. I'm quite a frail man, a bottom man, teenage boy myself, and I doubt I'm the ideal Olympus god that many have come to expect from such porn films. I won't go into the more private areas of that sort of image. And thirdly, I'd like to make a point. I read this article a long while ago, but it's about a porn director by the name of Anna Arrowsmith, and who went by the name of Anna Span for whatever reasons in her porn career. But she went about going into it about trying to equalise, make it more equal for women to be part of the porn industry and try and add more, less of a taboo in a male-run industry to make women more powerful in the industry, and I think that makes a female sexuality more open. And if that's a sign for the future, I think porn has the potential to become more liberating for certain sexes and more, well, I wouldn't say educational because that'd be an odd lesson for me in school, but it can open up new avenues, and I hope that the potential for it can go away from this very wrong view almost of porn. That's all I have to say.
Hi, it's a question really, and I'm just hoping maybe Comrades might have a view, or Amy might have a view when she comes back. I work with young people. I'm a social worker in children and adolescent mental health. What we're seeing more and more in our unit over the last 5 or 6 years are young girls being raped. Now, we've always worked with, in my field, we've always worked with sexually abused young people, but mainly this was coming 5-10 years ago. This was coming from within the family, mainly, or people known to the family, or sort of occasionally sort of the stranger who jumps out from behind the bushes type scenario. But in the last few weeks, 3 of my young people have spoken to me about having been raped in school by school friends. Now, and I'm trying to grapple with what's happening here. They're not talking about being raped by older men. They're talking about being raped by their classmates. They're talking about so we're talking about girls between the age of 12 and 16 being raped by boys between the age of 12 and 18, really. So either their classmates or their friends of their classmates, whatever. And I really just can't get my head around this, because it seems to be such a significant shift in the sort of work that I have been doing and knowing to do for the last 24 years as a social worker. I'm just wondering whether some of that is related to the sort of imagery within pornography that is being fed to young boys, or whether there's another explanation. I'm really not sure, and I'm just hoping, coming to Marxism, that maybe this is a good place to start that discussion and to help us to develop our understanding around that.
Brilliant. Hi, my name's Anna. What I wanted to focus my contribution is the way the porn industry has actually successfully appropriated the language of the women's liberation movement, because what you see actually a lot of the porn industry and the sex positive movement is telling women that this is how you're sexually liberated, that you can go out and do what you want, and it's actually really frustrating that our parents, our grandmothers have actually went out into the street demanding their right to enjoy sex, and some, these companies have come in and tried to commodify that. I think it's absolutely disgusting, and I think there's actually been a massive backlash from it, because women and young girls are being told this is what you're worth, to be hot and to allow your worth, the entire worth is based on how men see you and how desirable you are. And then when young girls live up to these expectations, they become sluts, they become whores, and they become women and girls that you should be, who deserve to be raped. And I think that's why we have this massive, slut movement across the globe. And I think another example of that is how, like for example, women's boobs is used to sell different commodities, yet my mum tries to breastfeed my younger brother, and that's seen as inappropriate in a restaurant. I think that really shows the contradictions, and like Amy mentioned, how alienated we must be from ourselves and each other, that we have to watch 2 people pretending to have sex to get ourselves off. And actually, I think the sex positivity movement completely reduces women's oppression to individuals, because women's oppression is not going to be lifted if we go buy the new dildo, if we go to Ann Summers and start buying new bras and knickers. And I think that the porn debate it's been painted as those who are anti-sex and those who are pro-sex, and that's not what it is. I'm completely pro-sex, but I'm actually really quite critical of porn. And I wanted to get back to what you said, and there's a new rise about this feminist porn, and I'm sorry, comrades, if a woman is behind the camera and she's the director, the porn doesn't suddenly become feminist, because the woman is still being objectified and she's still being commodified, and women can be sexist too. I wanted to have a quick question to Amy, and that's, how do we relate to sex workers? Because there's an actual debate coming out now that we're moralising sex workers, and there's actually an element of protection that they require. There is a new study that comes out that says actually 95% of sex workers don't want to be doing sex work. And as Marxists, we have to look at the material condition that's pushing women into these sex work. And I think it's completely unfair that the 5% who are out there being the loudest when it comes around the porn debate. So I wanted to say, as Marxists, how do we relate to that? How do we relate to the idea of a sex work trade union as well? Thank you.
I want to start where Anna finished off. We face a whole series of contradictions which arise out of the situation of women's oppression in society, and one of them is that a consequence of economic conditions which women find themselves in, that they often feel that the only way that they can get by in terms of whether they're doing their studies or whether they're actually bringing up a family, bringing up children, is actually getting involved in sex work. And we actually have to say that that is not about choice, and that it's not about choice at all, and we are completely opposed to the existence of sex work in that sense, and we're completely opposed to pornography. However, banning it is not going to be the solution. the solution to it can only come as a result of fighting to create the kinds of jobs and conditions where people don't actually have to go in that. And we actually have to be able to say the two things at once. It also means to say it's not actually easy organising sex workers, but of course you support people getting organised and being able to do something about the conditions which they're under. Now, but having said that, I actually do want to talk a little bit about the way in which it seems to me that, first of all, we actually have to say that porn as such is a reflection of women's oppression, and therefore what is reflected in the porn films is reinforcing the notion that women are not just objects. Actually, today's porn seems to me to be much more violent, much more horrific, and much more degrading of women than it has ever been before. And we actually, and I think, what does that come out of? It partly comes out of when there was an attack on political correctness, when we actually really moved forward in the 70s and the early 80s, actually talking about equality, how women should be treated, women's right to sexual pleasure, how that should be reflected in the workplaces and so on and so forth. There was an attempt to push that back initially by trashing political correctness. One of the consequences of the trashing of it was the rise of raunch culture, and the porn industry is actually reflecting is reflecting that. And I therefore think we actually have to be very sharp about saying that although it does reflect the actual conditions of alienation and women's oppression inside society, we need to engage in a debate with people. Is it actually the case that you have to get off with one another by actually filming yourself actually having sex? Isn't there something about a relationship between two people, which means that is a private act, something that you develop? Whether you develop it over 24 hours or whether you develop it over 48 hours or a lifetime is neither here nor there. But actually this notion that you have to film it, who is driving the question of the filming of it? It's actually the objectification of women which is driving it, because it is women who are seen as the objects. The sexual acts which are acted, the demand that women perform, are about actually satisfying men, and it's not about the whole notion in the 60s of women's sexual pleasure, the right to women's orgasms, the question of the clitoris, all different kinds of stimulation. That seems to have disappeared off the agenda to be actually replaced. Well, acts like giving head and all the rest of it in terms of, and therefore male sexuality, which distorts both women's sexuality, but it also distorts men. I think we really need to be clear about that. We actually want to have a debate about that.
Yeah, I'm a man. There you go. Good balance. Don't applaud me for that. Oh, well done. Like Amy, I'm also very old. I'm in my 30s. I'm in my 30s as well. But an experience I can say from when I was at school is something that, whilst more prevalent now with mobile phones and everything else that's going around, is viewing pornography at school, and it actually taking a role, if you like it or not, in your education. When I was 14, it wasn't a mobile phone, it was a VHS cassette. But one of the things with that, of course, it was the first time I had seen sex. I'd actually seen genitals in that sense, you know what I mean? I'd seen people together, and the other sexual acts. I'd never seen this, you'd never had any idea about this. There was a video, and I'm sure that people here, comrades who are teachers, will know a bit more about this. I can't remember if it was the late 80s or early 90s, that was used for education, which did actually feature the sexual act. I think they were both teachers, and there was an absolute uproar about it. BBC Primary. Yeah, that was it. And teachers loved it because they went, great, we can actually show them this is what it actually is. Of course, there was uproar. A particular note about it, though, is that the woman involved was a primary school teacher. They were both teachers, I think. They didn't give a shit about the man, but because she was a primary school teacher, of course, that was an extra outrage. Of course it was. So there's an issue there with education. We do need better sex education because this pornography is taking that role. As Amy said, the sorts of things, you know, the scenes always end with the man ejaculating. It's on the woman's face as well, usually. That is very, very clearly an issue of power, isn't it? Very clear. You know what I mean? And when you're thinking about your education about sex, you imagine when you are young and you're developing your first sexual relationship, how skewed that can be. I know that my first relationships would not have lasted even as long as they did if I thought that was normal. It'd be really bad. There's also, I want to talk about very quickly, this will fill 3 minutes quite quickly. Talking about being a man trying to relate with other men when you're trying to take on certain ideas of sexism. Because things like pornography and images of women and stuff like that is very difficult because, of course, sex is a natural act. So, 1 minute, right, 1 minute, here we go, boom, right, talk quickly. Because it's sexual act, people thought, obviously it's tied up in senses of being natural, but as Amy says, you get a very skewed, very limited view on sexuality. The things I've talked about, the ejaculation in women's face, for instance, you know what I mean, horrible views, and it's very difficult. You know, a lot of men, when I say to them, say I'm against page 3, they do not understand the concept. They genuinely are confused by it. They think that somehow I'm against breasts. Which is not the case, whatsoever. So it is very difficult on that, and I'll just one last thing I want to say is there's a documentary a while ago, Channel 4, speaking to a woman who had been essentially groomed at the age of 18 into getting into pornography. She was now in her early 30s. Because she was in her early 30s, the films she was having to do were films where she was getting urinated on and things like that. Why? Because she was in her 30s, she's well past it. Yeah. But this woman, she, from the age of 18, had not been in education or work. What else could she do? And that is the effect it's doing on. And people are getting involved in this. They are now grooming. This is what this is. This is grooming of women into a form of work where they have to sell the body as a commodity, and then after a certain age, you're on the scrap heap and there's not going to be anywhere else to go.
Hey, I'm Trish, I'm at SWP in Coventry. I wanted to ask a specific question about kink and that community, because although we talk about like a very violent pornography and how there really isn't any sort of consent there because you have to do it because you've been like groomed or you haven't got any choice because of money. But whereas in the kink community, things that are maybe seen as extreme are completely consensual, and they're usually in quite even relationships. It's the only community I know that is very open and accepting of polyamorous couples, that is not all about marriage, and actually does talk about sexual pleasure for all. Even people who are in submissive positions are considered, they are meant to be enjoying themselves, and if that's not happening, there is uproar. So it's one area. I mean, I don't agree with the sort of the commoditisation of the fetish community, or like the toys and the magazines and the porn that comes with it, unfortunately, because if someone can make a buck out of it, they're gonna. But it does seem to be one area that I have seen this, unfortunately, is like the Radfems as well, who are very against the very existence of it, but yet there does seem to be some sort of genuine sexual freedom there, and I just wondered where as socialists we can interact with people within that community.
Hi there, I think we need to clarify something. I think we need to make a distinction between the general background noise, background hum of sexism in society and rape as a specific act. Because, you see, as far as I'm concerned, child pornography is rape because these are children, they're not in a position to give consent. I think we've got to be careful. Now, pornography shows a rape act. Yes, it's reinforcing a sexist society. Obviously, rape is massively trivialised in society. But if a woman consents to acting out a rape act, you can't always make the automatic assumption that she is doing it without her consent. There's a problem there, because someone can, obviously your attitude to sexuality is shaped by society, but someone can consent to something which might be dominating, and the previous speaker also touched on that as well. What was the other one? Yes. I mean, like prostitution. A certain feminist position is the idea that the whole act of prostitution is rape. Now, of course, it's certainly unequal power relations, certainly reinforces women's oppression, and most prostitutes are women, of course not all. But you see, prostitutes sometimes go to the police saying they've been raped, and they get laughed at by the coppers. Well, you're a prostitute, it's your job to just provide sex. You see, there are times when an active prostitute does consent to sex, and they know when they're not consenting to sex. Just because something is a general background known as sexism, rape is a specific act. And I want to just touch on something the first speaker said about if you're manipulated and lied to, and if it's in a sexual context. You see, it isn't always necessarily rape. For example, I talked briefly this thing called rape by deception, which is a whole new meeting in itself. The idea if someone's lied to you, they've concealed something about themselves to make it hopefully more likely for you to have sex with them, does not automatically remove your ability to consent. Now, I'm not trivialising the violation and the abuse, but I think in Scandinavia, one particular country where someone failed to disclose their HIV status, the person who, I mean, obviously that was a neglection of the other person's health, and obviously it was completely wrong to go and do, but because of the pressure they felt they didn't want to disclose it, and the other person made an allegation of rape against them. But I don't think rape is something where you have sex with somebody and then you later on find something out about them as rape. It's something else. It can be manipulative, it can be unethical, but I don't think it's the same. And it's also like transgender issue. Some people have made allegations of rape when they found out somebody's been, it's a small minority of cases where previous sex, they thought they were violated and they thought they were being raped. But again, that isn't the same thing, so I think we have to be careful here. We live in an oppressive society, but we need to tease out rape as a very specific act. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't know whether people saw the programme that was on Channel 4. It was probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, and it was called Sex Education versus Pornography. And there was a really sort of fascinating part to it because it came up with similar statistics that Amy talked about at the beginning, the number of young people and the age at which they access porn. And it went into a school for a week, and one of the bits that I saw, which I thought was particularly instructive, and it goes along with what people are talking about, the distortion of people's bodies and how that's reflected, is they had a bunch of maybe 15-year-old boys, and they showed them, they had a whole wall full of pictures of men's penises. And they asked them to identify with whichever one they felt they would like to be like, or something like that. The thing that was amazing about the impact of this on the young men was that this was one of the first times that they had seen penises that were of different shapes, that were not shaved of all their pubic hair to make them look bigger, and actually the relief that these young men felt that they were actually normal. And it opened a massive door to a whole then question of debates around the way in which, one, people view themselves, the way in which sexuality is massively distorted, and then the way in which relationships are distorted. So once we start to unpack a whole load of this stuff, I think you can start to have a good open dialogue with people about sex is not about telling somebody what to do and they just do it for you. It's about a whole process of negotiation or relationships and relations that people engage in from that point. It was really instructive to see that. The other thing I just wanted to come on to is this question. Somebody said that porn is getting much more violent now. Do we know that that is the case? Snuff movies, I don't know if you've heard about snuff movies. Snuff movies have been around for a long, long time. Now, I don't know whether or not, because actually, I don't know whether or not it's the proportions of pornography that have grown massively, or whether it is violence in porn. I really don't know, and I would like to know if there is any sort of research around this or not at all, because I think there can be a danger, I think, sometimes, that we can go towards the moral panic around porn as well. And I think we have to be very concrete in terms of how we're approaching it. We're approaching it in terms of the commodification of people's bodies, the commodification of sexuality. Under capitalism, we know this is massively related to commodity production in our society. And the crossover between the oppression of women and the commodification in our society of human relations is at the heart and the root and the cause of what is the problem with pornography. And I think we have to look towards that, rather than necessarily looking just at some of the sort of moral issues that come out of it as well.
Back you. First, then you.
Yeah, I'm a teacher in Hackney, Anna. I just wanted to go back a little bit to what's happening in schools, because it is deeply concerning that sexting, the sending of images of yourself naked to somebody else that then shared, is extremely common amongst children from 11 and maybe even younger. And I would argue that it is different because we're dealing with younger children than it used to be. It used to be your 14, 15-year-olds who would try and get hold of the magazine. It is different. We don't know what the impact is, but it is a reflection of society, and I think it reinforces. It's dialectical relationship, and the distortion it has is it is also the case. The girls feel pressure to do it. The boys feel pressure to share it. If you're 11, 12, 13, you're still questioning your sexuality. This is all
heterosexual. So all of the gay children that are feeling under pressure, it's a terrible thing. But we can't call for banning it, because A, we can't. We don't want PRISM and NSA doing all this stuff. It's not going to happen. But the other thing I wanted to say is that we have to challenge it, and I actually urge every teacher, I think we should be, as SWP teachers, launching a serious campaign for anti-sexist education. To actually have meetings, have research, actually start arming teachers who hate this stuff. I am now getting children. A 16-year-old girl walks into a class full of 15-year-olds, somebody wolf whistles her. I've never had that in my time as a teacher. The second thing I want to say, but I think we can do something about it, and I think teachers will cry out for it. Second thing I wanted to say is about the commodification, always. So sexting, these images go out, you can't do anything about it, they're out there. Snapchat, how many of you heard of Snapchat? Snapchat is a new app which gives you an image for 10 seconds. So here's the market. All right, you don't like the fact this is going to go on a Facebook page and everywhere. We'll give you something where you can send, and 45% of the images on Snapchat are people naked, right? You can have it for just 10 seconds. Brilliant. Capitalism sorts out all our problems in this area. It's really clear. And the last thing I want to say is actually it's a separate story about what do we want. I've got a friend who luckily isn't in this room at the moment, who texted me 2 weeks ago and said, I've chucked out all my porn. Right, now I texted back, we have a lot of arguments about women's oppression. I texted back and I said, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I think, did you do it by mistake? Or did you want this to happen? And she said, no, it's a great thing. I finally get it. She is in a loving relationship where they have real sex and they get on, and she finally understands that these are alienated images. And I'd actually say, any image that is removed from a human interrelationship, whether it's kink or whatever it comes from, is still one step removed from real relations.
Hi, I'm Anders, I'm from Denmark, and we were the first country which liberated pornography under a right-wing government in 1972, I think. There was a question about desire, and I think that sexual desire, like any other desire, it's possibly much more negotiated, distorted, facilitated all the time than we actually think it might be. If we go back to classical Marx, it's like the ruling ideas in society is the ruling class ideas. So maybe we should see it in this relation. Another thing is, I think pornography and this whole idea about video filming and all these things should be seen in the relation with neoliberalism and this performance culture we have. We should always be the best, we should always perform, we should always put ourselves in the center, and you cannot see pornography outside that whole thing in society. Yeah, that was just these 2 comments.
What about the man at the back? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Siobhan, I'm also in the Socialist Workers' Party. I work in sexual health with young people, and I think quite a few people have picked up the points that I wanted to make. But I work in sexual health services mostly with under 18 and under 16 young people, and I actually echo what the social worker was saying about some of what we're seeing coming through actually in terms of very young people and girls who they're not saying they're being raped, actually, for us, they don't see it as rape, but certainly are being coerced and engaging in sexual acts that maybe they wouldn't in a different climate. And certainly, and often sexual acts at a very young age that aren't seen as sex, because it doesn't involve penetration, but often involves groups of young men. And I think the other worrying thing is sometimes the age of the young men. One of the things I want to talk about around that, because it is very real and it's happening as people have talked about in the schools and with the sex texting, is I actually think is how do we approach this? Because I actually think there's a real danger of getting into moral panics, which is what the Tories and the rest of society is. I don't know if we can blame it all on porn. I find it quite worrying about just how accessible the pornography is. The thought that 8 and 9-year-old young people are accessing quite graphic pornographic images, I think is quite worrying. And I think it is distorting their sexuality. I think what we're seeing now, and there is research coming through, we talk a lot about the objectification of women in this, which is very, very true, but it's also very damaging to young men in terms of how they begin to view themselves and their bodies. We often have young men who come into our services and they want to talk to a man because they're very worried that actually maybe their penis isn't okay. You know, and a lot of the work is actually just saying, no, they look perfectly normal. And I think that's happening a lot as well, but there's a real distortion, I think, then about how young people are viewing themselves, their expectations around what they should be doing, not just for their boyfriends, but for other people, but also what you can expect from your girlfriend. And I think really that we really need to guard as socialists against getting really moralistic about this. A huge number of people are accessing pornography. It is out there. And I actually think the arguments we need to be having aren't about pornography per se, even though we don't like it, and we sort of have to have those arguments. The arguments we have to have are about oppression and about sexism, and I think the sexual health education we need to fight for is sexual health education that actually does properly educate young people. And some of the stuff that we try and do with young men and young women is get them to look at some of that stuff, to actually deconstruct pornography, get them to think about what it is. Why did they think it's like that? What was it saying about men and women and relationships? And actually starting putting that stuff back on the agenda, because I also think what's happening in the schools is not only we're not dealing with sexual health or lots of relationships issues, as other people have said, we're not dealing with sexism, we're not dealing with homophobia, we're not dealing with a whole range of things, and those are the conversations within which we then begin to engage people so that they can start thinking for themselves about why they don't need to be accessing something that's so destructive.
I wanted to talk about my experiences working in magazine distribution as a worker there. In the 80s, I actually worked with W.H. Smith's, and I worked for their distribution arm, and they also worked for the retail arm. And it was the period where, around the early 80s, where W.H. Smith's was still putting top shelf mags on their shelves. And for the distribution arm, I got a real insight into how voracious the publishers were about getting this stuff out. I mean, you know, there was a lot of criticism about news agents stocking this stuff, but really they had no choice in it. They would get a bundle with their Cosmopolitans and their House and Gardens and their Radio Times. They would also get the Paul Raymond stuff on sale return basis, but when they just returned it, the following week they get some more of it. And you know, if they phoned up, and there were lots of Asian shopkeepers I remember phoning up saying, look, I really don't, this is against my religion, I don't want this stuff, I'm against oppression of women. They were told, well, if you want the Daily Express and if you want all the other stuff, you take that stuff as well. You know, how it was interlinked as an industry. But also, I mean, I remember working on the shop floor in my local W.H. Smith's branch, where there was still, you know, when there was actually quite a strong feminist movement and quite linked to the local workers' movement. And I remember the panic that my boss would run around and say, Sasha, get down, get all the men-onlys and all the penthouses down. I've heard there's going to be a demonstration soon or whatever. So they come down, be shoved away. They didn't turn up. It was, all right, go and put them back up again. So I got to put them back up. And no, they did turn up. And you know, actually, they were afraid. That was really good. They were afraid. They didn't. You know, they couldn't take it for granted. There wouldn't be a fight back against this kind of thing. It was almost like... sorry? 1 minute. Okay, yeah. Not much to say to be honest. But that was great. The fear and the panic in my man actually had a nervous breakdown. Not entirely related to that, but he ended up sitting in they had the children's toy department. They had football sort of a swimming pool for the footballs, and he was found sat in there one day. Well, never mind, that was quite fun. But I want to say how different that is. How different that is. That kind of fear, that kind of worry about should they do this, should they not, to the ubiquity of porn today. When you pick up your Metro in the morning, they are they're running adverts for people. We're looking for people in the adult film industry, and we'll pay your expenses, we'll pay your lunch and whatever. This is absolutely unacceptable. We want them to be afraid of that sort of thing. We want to say, no, this is ours. You're not selling it. You're not selling it, but you're not stealing it from us.
I really am old, so I just want to say first a little bit about how far we have come, because one of the very important surveys that was done soon after the war was the Family and Kinship in East London. I don't know how many people have read it, But the sort of response that the interviewers got then when they talked to married women about sex was things like, oh, it don't bother me too often. Now, I think it is a very good thing that we've moved on from that. You know, the advances, the availability of contraception, and that took a hell of a long time for it to be freely and readily available for women. You know, in 1964, when I got married, I had to get my husband's written permission, my fiancé's written permission to go to the family planning clinic to be fitted with a Dutch cap. Great fun. They wouldn't put me on the pill because it was too new. All of this. Now, the availability of contraception allowed for what's been spoken about, allowed women to make the demand to be able to enjoy sex and to enjoy it freely, and for it to be freely, you know, entered into relationships of all kinds developed. And it seems as if they can't bear us to have that. It seems as if they can't, you know, you get somewhere, there was a book, very popular book called The Joy of Sex. I can't imagine anybody actually publishing a book today called The Joy of Sex. It would be The Cost of Sex, or The Porsche with Your Sex, or the, you know, I mean, we had a branch meeting on 50 Shades of Grey, and I'm really glad that somebody else was prepared to read it so that we didn't have to. But as far as I can gather, it's about, A, isn't it wonderful for women to be submissive? And B, isn't it wonderful to have a man who can buy all those things with labels on? Well, I'm sorry, you know, as soon as we're getting somewhere, like it's been said, like Jan has said, like it's talked about the narrowness of porn, it's taken from us. But what it needs is the reason we were able to make those advances in the 60s and the 70s. The reason we were able to make those demands and to win some of them was that we were doing it in terms of a rising class struggle. We were a part of a general fight. The fight for women's liberation is the fight for the liberation of us all. And that is what we have to bring back today. We have to see it in, you know, it's really important when we got the TUC to agree that abortion was a class issue, and the TUC called the demonstration on abortion. And my memory is that it was 250,000 strong. My memory is right. Anyway, this is what we need to do. We need to get back that generalised struggle in which we can fight for the liberation of everybody and our sexuality with it.
Well, thanks everybody, because I thought that was a really interesting discussion, and it definitely is very thought-provoking, and I'm sure I'm not going to be able to come back on everything people said, so, you know, let's continue these discussions. The first thing I want to say, actually, I'm really glad people raised particular issues, because I didn't cover them, but they are real questions. And the first is, our objections to pornography do not stem from a judgment of the acts themselves. I think we have to be clear on that, because actually, lots of people do lots of different things. As socialists, we don't decide, this is normal sex, this is not, this is that. Actually though, the difference is here, is there is a difference between consenting adults in the real world, negotiating their boundaries with whoever they want to do, and deciding what they want to explore. That's very different to what is portrayed often in pornography, and the images that are bombarded at you, we're completely separated from that idea of how you explore sex in the real way. And actually, what we do understand about porn is that because they, in the context of capitalism, then reflects back some of the most degrading, of objectifying images of women in that way on purpose because of how sexism is rooted in society. So I do want to be clear about that, though. Our objections actually come from the fact, though, that this is a commodified form of sex removed in this way. It's not about the actual acts themselves, but how porn presents itself reflects back often a whole sexism. I also want to be really clear that it's really good that people brought up, actually, Laurie Penny and the idea of feminist porn, because actually I read the feminist porn book for this meeting, which some people might find quite surprising that you find something called a feminist porn book. But actually, it does reflect back some of the arguments from before, because I heard Laurie Penny on the radio debating this, and it's almost that if you challenge pornography, you're characterised as being conservative, that was the term she actually used, and you are anti-sex. And actually, I think this is a very false conception of it. But also, in the feminist porn thing, which brings up something that someone raised, this idea, and you can understand where people are coming from. Because you look at the mainstream porn and think, that's not how I necessarily want it. I think some of it's quite sexist. Couldn't we have a different sort of pornography that, you know, might be quite nice for us and people taking it on? The problem is that it doesn't get away from the fact that you are filming people who are not actually wanting to have sex, you know, they're paid to do it, and abstracting from the relations. It's quite interesting because when you read and you delve a bit deeper into this book and read about it, it comes out that, yeah, they start off with this vision, but actually capitalism means they can't really do what their vision is to start with, because actually they've got to have it distributed, so you've got to do a deal with a big distribution company. Actually, then you've got to maybe compromise some of your principles for that reason. Actually, you know, what they end up saying is, oh, we're just producing, and this is their words, of a performer and a producer of porn, who says, well, maybe in the end it's just a fair trade version of pornography. Well, the problem here is, okay, maybe you say that's a bit better, but aren't you against the whole system of this idea of commodification, taking sexuality and selling it? And the thing is here, is that what I found really disturbing in this book is one performer absolutely buying into this whole image that this is a liberating thing, saying, through pornography, she had been able to discover her own sexuality and her own, you know, pleasures. And you just think, what an indictment on society, that you can't do that through actually relating to people that you've met and you might want to explore with. It needs you to be paid in an industry to find out perhaps what you might want to do sexually. To me, that just was a real indictment. And actually, for every person that you hold up like that and say, oh, it's great, I found it really liberating, I think it's absolutely right what people say. A number of stories and quite harrowing accounts. And on purpose steered clear of actually talking about these in detail in this meeting, but very harrowing accounts of how performers actually end up being forced into do things they hadn't agreed to do. And actually some of it was documented on a mainstream documentary. It wasn't anything to do with the sex industry, it was just someone following a sex performer and ends up witnessing quite an horrific act and has to get the performer out of that place. You can just find it on the internet, just anyway. So I think that is absolutely the case, really. Here. So the point being here is I don't think you can have a feminist pornography in any way, because the whole point about pornography is what we're saying is it takes this unique personal thing, commodifies it and sells it back for money, and that's the distorting motive. At the end of it, people say, well, surely under a different society, wouldn't we, maybe people might experiment to video each other. Well, to be honest with you, first of all, I think that you might be more involved actually enjoying sex directly yourself rather than sitting behind the camera doing it, but also, maybe you might do. If there's no money involved, you wouldn't be selling it on. Why is it being produced in the first place? To be sold on and on. So I think I don't think it would be in the same way at all. But I definitely think this is a debate that's hopping up. That was a debate about the academic journal, actually, about whether really you were a feminist pornographer or a radical feminist and then being viewed as conservative. And I think this is something that we will have to cut through a lot more about our own views on it in this way. I share a lot of people's views actually about it, about the stuff in schools. It's really interesting to hear those things. The point is here, it's not a moral panic. Young people are curious about sex and want to know about it, and that's the case, I would have thought, in any age or whatever's there. The difference is when you have a massive amount of social media that you can immediately access in that way, then you can immediately make decisions that then have a massive impact, because you're young, you're negotiating things, you don't always know how that's going to be, so you can end up putting images there, particularly in a society as a whole, this is, it's highly sexualised, telling you that's the right thing to do. That's how you're going to get more esteem, if you like, because you look good, you're posting it up and all that. So I think it's a massive thing, and I think it's absolutely right to think, how can we arm people to be able to negotiate all those terrains, but actually at heart of it, come out of it so they can have these sexual relations that they'd want to enjoy. And I think it's absolutely right when people came up, this distorts us all. This is not just about women. This distorts everything in terms of our relations in that way. Men are also taken with, as an ideal, as you put it very much, they're all-powerful, in all the ways that people talked about. This doesn't conform. This is not actually reality for most young men at all. It distorts our whole sexual relations in terms of what we think sex is about, how we aspire to it in that way. I absolutely agree, though, that when we just take it on these terms, then it becomes a very individualised approach to oppression. And part of what we're trying to come out of here is not reduce down a discussion just to the ins and outs of the acts of pornography and whatever, but actually about how we can see ourselves very differently as humans and have completely different human relations. That's actually something that drives us as socialists, really, for a different sort of world in that way. And I think it's absolutely right that we have to locate then this pornography within the oppression that exists in society. And people were absolutely right to bring up, you know, as I did before, about, you know, the racial stereotyping, but actually for LGBT people as well. Absolutely. But we want actually a slightly rid of that. And actually, we have things that bring us together, because this distorts us and individualises us. Actually, when people come together, fighting in lots of ways, it changes how we see each other, how we change ourselves, our relationships between each other as well. So I think it's right. On the one hand, we can take up issues in the way that people talked about in schools, in the way that we can talk about in youth services, on those ideas. We can go on the demos against the porn clubs like that one, the Playboy one, or some of the worst aspects that come out in the student unions when, you know, aspects of porn culture come in about the pimps and hoes nights or the lap dancing clubs that marxist students go. We should be leading campaigns, working with other people to do that, absolutely. But also, we have to take these arguments, they're not separated off from the rest of capitalism, are they, in that way? And we're going to be part of much bigger fights as well, whether it's around the NHS or the strikes in the autumn, hopefully by teachers, or other things like that, that bring people together in different ways, that actually mean we start relating as people who are struggling against the whole system that maintains this oppression and divides us. And in that context, we can see each other differently and fight for a world where we wouldn't have this, and where we absolutely go on to enjoy real, true, sexual, liberating relations.